Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. In this episode, I'll be talking to Peter Fargo, co-founder of the Climate Vigil movement, and Isaac Wardell, co-founder of the Porter's Gate Arts Collective. We'll be discussing the collaborative project created by these two organizations, a new Christian worship album called Climate Vigil Songs. This album, which we'll sample in this conversation, invites us to respond to climate change in ways that are meant to help us engage the challenges we face from spiritual perspectives, and even to understand creation care and earth advocacy as acts of worship. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Peter, Isaac, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for spending time with us to talk about this new project, the Climate Vigil Songs album. I want to note that it's a collaborative effort between the Climate Vigil Project and the Porter's Gate Worship Project. Peter, I want to start with you, and perhaps by way of introduction, you could talk about your work as one of the co-founders of the Climate Vigil movement and maybe help us to understand what the movement is all about.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'll just say thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast today. And it is such a privilege to have partnered with Isaac and the Porter's Gate Worship Project and all of the brilliant artists involved. They have brought spirit and fire to the Climate Vigil movement through their work and through the way that they have invited us to wrestle with climate change and creation care in general in our hearts and souls. So I'm very grateful for their partnership and all the other partners that have been involved in this project, which include the Evangelical Environmental Network, Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, the World Evangelical Alliance, an organization called Plant with Purpose, which is a Christian environmental organization, Tear Fund USA, World Renew, the Climate Witness Project, and a precursor to Climate Vigil, which is called Million Prayer Mission. So we are here together, and Isaac and I just have the opportunity to represent this coalition on the podcast today. The Climate Vigil concept arose out of prayer, a recognition that we have a problem, to use one of Isaac's quotes, and we have a responsibility. And also recognizing that this challenge of climate change is so big that none of us can do it alone. We invited people to pray about our climate crisis, and we invited people to take action. And because of the Porter's Gate's presence in the Christian music space, in the work that I was doing, they became the soundtrack for the work. And it was just a natural next step to pick up the phone and call Isaac, to whom I was introduced through a mutual friend, if they would like to be part of what we're working on. Because as I'm sure we'll talk more about, music is a form of prayer. It's a spiritual language. And I'm not sure if you've heard this phrase, but I grew up with a pastor who used to say, if you're singing, you're praying twice. So we wanted to invite musicians to partner with us to help people pray, not once, but twice. And the vigil concept came about in the same light of wanting to offer an opportunity for people to do something as a symbol of prayer that is not only what we would typically think of as prayer. Lighting a candle is an ancient form of entering into a sacred space and also doing that in community. And we do that, to use the title of one of the songs on the album, to watch and pray, to be watchful. We do that to lament bad things that have happened. We do that to gather community courage We come together for a community vigil, understanding that there's something that needs to change. And we do that as individuals or around the family table, lighting a candle to invite the Spirit and invite ourselves to be more aware of the Holy Spirit. So those are some of the elements of the climate vigil, inviting people to come together, light a candle, and pray. And music is a really important piece of that for us.
Isaac, I want to turn to you as creative director for the Porter's Gate Worship Project. Give us a sense of what this music collective is all about and describe the work that you do in that context.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my background vocationally is being a worship leader. I've been leading worship on Sundays in a particular church context for about 25 years. I'm 42 years old. This is what I've spent my life doing and what I've spent my life studying and all that stuff. And as far back as the late 90s, I started having conversations with lots of other worship leaders about how many astute individuals have observed that in a lot of evangelical worship spaces, the source material for the songs that we sing, the kind of subjects that our songs are about, can sometimes be a little narrow, maybe a little one-dimensional. The theological concepts that you hear, not only in evangelical churches, but sort of like in the top 20 most popular worship songs, it's going to be pretty consistently songs about maybe Jesus' nearness, which is wonderful and beautiful. There's a lot of songs about the blood of Jesus and how it saves us from our sins, and that's true. Hallelujah. There's a lot of songs that are about who God is and what his character is like. But many people over the last 20 or 30 years, as the church has kind of moved away from the hymnal, many people have observed that as we've moved away from the hymnal, in many ways, our worship lyrics have become a little less well-rounded. And so about 5 years ago, along with a number of other worship leader friends, as we were having these conversations about what would it mean to deepen and widen the sort of depth and breadth of the songs that we sing in the church, how would you go about doing that? I think that there's a lot of good strategies. I mean, I have a number of friends and colleagues who are involved in this movement to bring the Psalms back into worship. That's a wonderful way to give some more depth and breadth to our worship songs. I know a lot of individuals who, as kind of individual worship leaders, are trying to write worship songs out of a place of maybe more depth or more of an emotionally authentic place. But when it came to starting the Porter's Gate Worship Project, what that conversation sort of evolved into was saying that maybe it's not just up to one individual to kind of have all the answers for, how to bring renewal and greater depth to worship. Maybe it's not even for a single theological tradition, like a single denomination. Maybe to sort of fill out that breadth and depth of the kinds of songs we sing, maybe we really need some collaboration across denominational lines, like across lines of difference from our different traditions. And because of a couple of ecumenical projects I'd been a part of in the sort of early 2000s to mid 2000s, I had the opportunity to make some friends across those denominational lines, to make friends who are worship leaders in the Episcopal Church, Roman Catholic Church, the Southern Baptist Church, the Vineyard, from Calvary Chapel, from all these different worlds. And not just white denominations, but also friends who are in the African Methodist Episcopal context, or from the Church of God in Christ, or from the Hebrew Pentecostal world. And recognizing that as we come together around tables, that something different happens in our songwriting process. And beyond just getting people together around the tables with different denominational backgrounds, we also decided it would be important to get some people that brought some real theological expertise. And so when we have our songwriting gatherings, we might gather 40 or 50 songwriters at once. But in addition to just songwriters, that gathering of 40, 50 people also includes people who are professional theologians and scholars, people that are pastors, folks who have some expertise in these various levels to kind of speak into the projects that we're doing. So this is our sixth collaboration, I believe. We did a project focused on work and vocation. We've done a project focused on hospitality and welcoming across lines of difference. We've done a project called Justice Songs, a project called Lament Songs, Advent Songs, and now Climate Vigil Songs. And so this was something that I'd kind of had on my mind for a couple of years. From time to time, I've gotten invited to lead worship at various conferences or church events. And whenever someone asks me to lead worship and they have like a particular subject that's a theme that they ask me to choose songs for, if I have a hard time finding songs for that subject, like a little light bulb goes off in my head and I think, oh, that's a great area that we should dig into at some point in the future. And so a couple of years ago, I remember kind of registering, we really don't have a lot of great worship songs having to do with creation care and environmental justice. And so that's where the conversation with the Climate Vigil movement started picking up about 2 years ago.
It's so interesting that you are citing the desire to create something new and fresh, perhaps deeper, more authentic, because I will say that confession here is I don't listen to worship music as a rule. I was in a worship band for many years in Chicago with a vineyard, actually, and then led worship for church plants in Istanbul for a good number of years. But at some point, I kind of grew weary of worship music for the very reasons that you are citing. They seemed a little bit tired, the lyrics a little bit disconnected from much of our reality. And so I just gradually stopped listening. However, Porter's Gate music, I don't know how I found it, but when I found it, it was healing. It was like seriously healing. And I was just, I guess, so renewed by it that I sent out all the links I could to music I was listening to my old band members, right? And people I'd been leading with, and they're all over the world now, but they've also come to really appreciate that renewal of our interest in worship music. So thank you. So I have a question about the purpose of the album, and maybe even broader, one of the purposes of the Climate Vigil Project in general. And one of the value statements that I've read online about the project, I can read, climate change is dangerously altering God's good earth with life or death consequences for our neighbors, our children, and ourselves, which is a pretty bold statement that I'm imagining puts you at odds with at least some elements of the Evangelical Church in the U.S. And so my question is, to what extent does Climate Vigil seek to persuade skeptical Christians about the realities of climate crisis? Or is the project really aimed at mobilizing Christ followers who already acknowledge the problem and are moved to prayer and action naturally?
I would begin by saying the Lord does the conviction, and we do the truth-telling and the loving. That's what we feel called to do. We're commanded by Jesus to do it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is the law and the prophets. And when we think about loving God, we often think about worship. We often think about being in church with others in that spiritual posture. We don't all often think about the work of justice that we're also called to do. Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? So we bring that together in this movement, and we bring that together in this album. It's an opportunity for us to live out that calling and that commandment of Jesus to love God and love our neighbor, to pray and act on our climate crisis, because we recognize that this beautiful gift of God's creation is being unraveled by our sin. And we are, to be specific, in a place today where the average global temperature of God's good earth is higher than it has ever been in history. The average temperatures on this planet since 1980 have consistently been higher than any time in human history, and they're rising inexorably. The last 10 highest years of temperature records have been since 2010, with one exception, 1998. So when we think about that dramatic change that is a result of our decisions, our emissions of greenhouse gases, our climate pollution, then we have to stop and say, what's happening? What are we doing to God's good earth? And what are the consequences for the people who bear God's name, for all of God's people? The consequences include so many things that many of us are familiar with, but some may not be. Dramatic weather events that include heat waves, floods, more powerful storms, hurricanes, typhoons. We think about droughts in that context of extreme weather events. And then the impact on our food supply, the capacity that people have to grow their food and sustain their communities and their families. We could go on and on about what those impacts are. The analogy of a fever, I think, is really helpful because some people may say, okay, 1 or 2 degrees rise in temperature, what's the big deal? And I think all of us intuitively understand the impacts of climate change when we think about our experience personally having a fever, and a rise of 1, 2, 3 degrees can be significant in the symptoms that we experience and the danger that we're in. So here we are. We love God by responding to the climate crisis, prayer, and action. We love our neighbor by responding to the climate crisis with prayer and action. We know we need to do, but we haven't found that spiritual courage to do it yet, and to do it together.
Isaac, I want to hear your answer to that question as well, but I will say in response to Peter that one thing that gives me hope about this project, about the album, is that I think that there could be hope in persuading people to maybe look again at the issues that they're skeptical about if music takes them there. Because I think these days a lot of people are resistant to logical arguments, I think partly because the conversation has become so politicized. But I think in a way, music has this power to subvert those defenses. So I just wonder if there isn't that potential power in this project to persuade people who might otherwise have been skeptical. But anyway, Isaac, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I echo all of Peter's sentiments. What's nice is that Peter, of course, has a background as a scientist, in the world of forestry. And my background is a little different. I'm coming from the background of having worked vocationally in the church, specifically in the Evangelical Church for the last 2 decades. And so I feel like I approach it from a slightly more kind of pastoral and strategic standpoint. My perspective on this has been formed significantly by the last couple of years of my life, where 2 years ago, my family and I, we moved to Belgium, where I am doing a graduate fellowship in liturgical studies right now. My program is extremely ecumenical, but besides being ecumenical, my program is extremely international. So my classmates are from Egypt and Nigeria and Uganda and Malaysia and Venezuela and all over the place. And it's really struck me since I've been living here in Belgium, working with Christians from all over the world, from different denominational backgrounds, how consistently it's the case that talking about doing a better job of creation care and thinking about environmental justice is like 100% completely intuitive and non-controversial to pretty much every Christians from pretty much every country in the world, except the United States and parts of Canada. So first of all, it's just great to get that little piece of perspective on it. As a matter of fact, it's so intuitive for my classmates from countries like Nigeria and Rwanda and Australia or whatever, that this comes as naturally as an outworking of Jesus' teaching about the world, to think about caring for the world and caring for creation. It's just as natural of a conversation as something like caring for refugees, which is this kind of equally biblical and clear teaching. And yet, here in the United States, both of those subjects, you use the word politicized, both of those subjects have been brought into some cultural narratives where the church and Christians in particular are being asked by political parties to really leave their sort of Christian convictions at the door for the sake of political arguments. And so I guess what my perspective on it is in terms of the controversializing factor, it's very, very encouraging to me that these songs are already getting so much attention and being sung by a lot of churches outside the United States. That's a big encouragement. It's very encouraging to me that this subject of climate justice might be a big global problem, but we have a big global church that's really excited about it. And so those are real encouragements to me. And then when it comes to the kind of conversion part you're talking about what about churches in the USA that are really resistant to this? Well, I think the other thing that we have that we can be thankful for is that even for Christians who maybe find themselves, sometimes unwittingly, for Christians who find themselves in real bondage to kind of captivity of political imaginations, I think when Christians are really in bondage, that we have the opportunity to pray for each other and that God delivers people from bondage. But when it comes to a lot of these conversations that really get at the heart of some political idolatries, those, as Christ would say, those are demons that only come out with prayer and fasting. I think that the kinds of interactions I have online with people who are not happy about Climate Vigil Songs, they don't tend to be quoting scripture. I had someone we posted the lyrics to a song, these very biblical lyrics, and somebody posted on the site, they said, "This is a bunch of tree-hugging hippie bullcrap." And I thought, all right, well, this is someone who's letting their opinions be known about it. It's a Christian posting the thing. You go click on their page and it says, my name's so-and-so, I'm a Christ follower, etc. But I think that's someone that needs to be delivered from a form of bondage. And so I hope that this project and all of these conversations around environmental justice and what it means for us to rediscover our Christian call to care for creation, I hope this can all be part of that sort of spiritual work where people are actually being delivered in those ways.
Well, I want to stay on this question of the power and potential of music to speak truth, to draw people into prayer, to motivate them to action. I wonder what your take is, Peter and Isaac, on the power of music to maybe make a difference in this conversation. Do you think there is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really easy answer to that question from my perspective, which is that evangelicals in particular have always understood that you really get to people through the heart. Like when I was a kid and when I was a teenager, I would go on mission trips with my youth group, right? Like we'd go serve in a small town in Mexico or something. And of course, from an outside financial perspective, some people have been critical of churches doing mission trips. They look at it and they say, oh, that's so much money to spend. Why don't you just use that money and give it to the mission organization? Why are you spending all that money having these high schoolers go? But one of the best arguments for it is people respond, they say, no, but part of these mission trips is that we understand by bringing young people out into the mission field that we're igniting their imaginations, that we are actually speaking to them through the heart. You are now cultivating the next generation of missionaries. You're cultivating another generation of people who are financially going to support missions. I think evangelicals understand what it means that you get to folks through the heart. It's not just about teaching that the Great Commission is important. It's about actually giving people an imagination for what it can be. And so, yeah, of course, music and people's experience of worship is one of the ways that we get to people through the heart. It's a way of getting around the political arguments and getting straight to people's emotional experience. And I hope that this record can work effectively that way.
I love that you brought up the example of short-term missions. Ironically, my writing partner and I just came out with a book that talks about reimagining short-term missions. And one of our main points has to do with this idea that much of the world knows so much that we don't know that we need to learn from. So really, the authors in the book call for a more collaborative approach. If we're going to talk about mission, even short-term missions, it's got to be a global church approach. We've all got to be in that conversation. It can't be something that's dictated from one particular cultural context. So I really like that. And I want to reiterate the fact that you have found encouragement in the fact that so many people outside of the states that you interact with are already in that place. They understand that part of our worship is to love the earth and care for the earth. So, yeah, I'm always eager to find ways to bring those voices in because we do, as a country, have so much to learn, especially as a church in the U.S. Peter, I do want to get your take on this idea of why music. At the top of the show, you suggested that bringing in the work of Porter's Gate has really energized the work in some ways and brought new perspective. I'm wondering what you could say about the power of music in this whole movement.
The Porter's Gate had been ministering to me for a year before Isaac and I connected. And the power of music is ever present for any of us who attend a church that involves music. It's an integral part of our worship experience, of our liturgies. And there's a reason for that. It's a deeply human experience. Having this vision right now of a small community in prehistoric times gathering around a fire and singing songs and telling stories. And music and fire are as old as humanity. So we're tapping into that common language that we all speak. It's also been an extremely important part of social movements for change. We think about the civil rights movement and We Shall Overcome, and all those songs, many of them from church, that folks like John Lewis and Martin Luther King would be singing in jail, even to the point that I think they faced additional consequences for filling the whole jail with music and prayer. So that's an example of how even in the depths of despair and darkness, we can tap into light, spirit, and song to inspire and move us forward.
Absolutely. Isaac, I read in the press release for this project that you had conceptualized the album as a whole, as something organized by a framework, really, a theological framework. I wonder if you could describe that framework and the components of it as you see it.
Yeah, I mean, theological framework is one way to put it. I think we might have even talked about it in the lens of sort of usefulness for the church. Like for those of us who are worship leaders, thinking about where do these songs fit into a worship service even. And so the way we thought about it was that we wanted to have at least three kinds of songs. We wanted to have songs that celebrated God's goodness, and those are the kinds of songs that fit at the beginning of a service. They're songs that fit after a sermon that has to do with caring for creation. They're songs that could be theologically provocative to help you see creation in a new way. But then we also wanted to have songs of lament, songs that can come after a confession. Some of us are used to the idea of corporate confession of sin as individuals, but actually when you open up the Bible and you look at the Psalms and you look at parts of Isaiah, you see that there are many times that the people of God confess their sin corporately. They actually confess these are the things that we have done wrong. And so some of our songs are lament, confession songs that can be done in that part of the service. But then we also wanted to have songs that were mobilization songs, songs that call people into action, the kinds of songs that you can do at the end of a service, the kinds of songs that send people back out into the world. And so that's why the album breaks down into those three categories.
So I think it would be helpful if we actually listen to some of the music.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I would love it if you could give us maybe some examples of each of those three components of usefulness.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. What I want to begin with is, we'll kind of go from kind of a dark place to a happier place. Why don't we listen for a minute to Good Lord, Deliver Us?
Good Lord, good Lord, good Lord, deliver us. Good Lord, good Lord, good Lord, deliver us. From the merchants in the temple, worship of our greed, from the whisper of the tempter, we should take more than we need, from the chains of wealth and plunder, from our avarice and pride, from the ever-growing hunger, from our vanity and strife. Good Lord, good Lord, good Lord, deliver us. Good Lord, good Lord, good Lord, deliver us.
So that song, Good Lord, Deliver Us, there's a couple different ways a church could sing it. You know, it could be that the whole congregation sings the chorus and then a soloist sings the verses, or maybe the whole congregation would sing the verses. But the chorus has this simple refrain, Good Lord, Deliver Us. But then these chorus lyrics, you know, like a lot of church music that I think works really well, it's specifically written to be about environmental justice, but actually it speaks to the human experience at a couple levels. And the first verse says, Good Lord, deliver us from the merchants in the temple, from the worship of our greed, from the whisper of the tempter that we should take more than we need, from our chains of wealth and plunder, from our avarice and pride, from the ever-growing hunger, from our vanity and strife. And so this is a song that, yes, it's about environmental justice. It's also about sin. It's about human nature and the ways that we are tempted and the ways that we fail. And it's a pleading for God to deliver us. And so this is a song that feels like it's useful for a congregation. The congregation can do this as part of a confession time. But like Peter said, it also has an element of being a song for a movement, that people could do this at a prayer vigil where they're gathering together and lighting a candle and asking God for deliverance and forgiveness.
It's interesting that you instinctively started with lament. I think there's a real deep truth to that impulse, because a lot of ways, if we have hope, if we move right to optimism without going through the grief of the problem, it kind of rings hollow, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lack of authenticity when you're not actually letting your heart enter into the pain of the situation.
Yeah, one of my mentors is a pastoral theologian, African Scottish guy up at Aberdeen. His name's John Swinton. He writes a lot about disability theology, but in his writing about disability theology, he has this amazing concept he talks about walking with the 3-mile-an-hour God. And without getting into all the details of it, talking about how when Jesus walked the earth with us, that he walked with us at average human land speed of 3 miles an hour. You know, this is the person who separated the earth, the waters from the dry land. This is the person who holds the whole world in his hand, and they chose to walk with us at 3 miles an hour. And what does that mean for us then when it comes to thinking about grieving the pains of the world? We don't have to hurry through the way we think about our grief, that we can actually walk through it at 3 miles an hour. And I think that the lament process is one of the pieces that maybe Christians are most apt to skip, whether it's talking about racial injustice, environmental injustice, whether it's talking about all the ways that the world is broken. Sometimes our platitudes sound hollow because we skipped the lament part. We skipped that walking with people at 3 miles an hour part.
I appreciate the lament so much, and that's something that reporters gave voice to in a bittersweet way, in a way that is beautiful and inviting to a listener, but is also heartbreaking. And Isaac talked about trying to find that sweet spot between message music and worship. And I think these lament songs are that for me in this moment that we find ourselves in, where we are pulling these strings of the life systems that sustain us. We might even think about this planet, Earth, as the only temple that God himself built. And when I hear those words, the merchants in the temple and the worship of our greed, I think about what it would look like for us to worship in this God-made temple in a different way. So there's a need to hit that rock bottom so that we can start to look up. I hear that too in another lament song, which is called All Creatures, thinking about the ways that in the traditional hymn of all creatures of our God and King, every creature created by God is infused with this desire and capacity to worship and to glorify their Creator. And for us to remove them, for us to cause them to go extinct and to silence them is sacrilegious in a way that many of us have not fully considered.
Isaac, where do we go next in terms of the usefulness of the music?
Yeah, let's listen to another song that I think is really congregationally singable. It's called Jubilee. We had a number of songwriters involved in this project. And really early on, maybe 6 months, 9 months before we ever started recording, when we were in the early parts of the project, a couple of our writers brought up this idea of, wouldn't it be great to incorporate this Old Testament biblical notion of Jubilee into this record? And so we opened up the Bible and started looking at this concept of Jubilee. And I thought, wow, I never saw it this way. Your listeners who maybe sort of know something about the Old Testament may be familiar with this idea of Jubilee as a year when, in certain intervals, there's both the 7-year interval and the 50-year interval, but at various intervals in the Old Testament, that the people's debts would be forgiven. And so that's the way you think about Jubilee. Oh, it's a joyful year because debts are forgiven. But the part that we can forget about, because we've gotten so far away from an agricultural economy, is that it wasn't just about human debt being forgiven, that the land actually was given rest for a year. That they said, in the year of Jubilee, let the land lie fallow, give the land its rest. I thought, wow, what an image for this conversation about environmental justice. What does it mean, the idea that it's not just human beings that are crying out, that are exhausted, who have been mistreated, but that the land itself is mistreated and needs to be renewed, that the land needs to be given its rest. And so it's all just to say, if I were to show you my sort of like demo folder, I mean, I think we literally went through 20 or 25 different melodic versions of how to sing about Jubilee. And we were about ready to give up on it because we just couldn't make it sing right. You know, that thing earlier about message music, like this does have to have artistry. It has to be singable. Jubilee was kind of a hard word to sing. So I was about ready to give up on it. And then at the very last minute, I mean, literally, we were already in the recording studio. I think it was our last day in the studio, maybe. At the very last minute, we had this idea. We opened up Psalm 37 And Psalm 37 had all this beautiful language in it about evil and good that all was connected to land in a way I'd never noticed. Where it talks about that the wicked will be no more, that the wicked will pass away, but the meek will inherit the land. And then goes on several more times and says all these things about the righteousness and unrighteous, and then says, but then if you follow the Lord, you will dwell in the land as you should. And thinking about goodness and evil, goodness, righteousness, actually having to do with the way that we inhabit the earth, the way we live in the land. And so this song, Bring in the Year of Jubilee, you'll hear in the lyrics that it kind of goes back and forth from talking about this Old Testament notion of Jubilee. And then the verses are basically verbatim pulled out of Psalm 37. So let's give it a listen. I love that at the end of that song, that the final lyric is the earth will sigh with relief. That's not actually strictly out of Psalm 37. That's pulling in a little bit of Revelation 22 language, but this notion of everyone, of all of creation, actually breathing a sigh of relief when the Lord actually comes to renew all things. Do you want to listen to one more song?
I do, but I do want to comment on something that's kind of enlightening me here. In a way, your struggle to find words and to find music and to read well, you're sharing that struggle in the songs. You're, in some ways, I would imagine, helping people to reimagine their reading of Scripture, to see things that they might not have seen before because of upbringing, culture, tradition. And so I love it that these songs are actually challenging us to read again, to look again with a fresh perspective. So that's, again, just citing the power of music to transform. So yeah, let's listen to the third song. What are you going to play for us?
Yeah, the last song I want to play through falls into this category of mobilization songs, sending songs. This song is called The Kingdom is Coming. And when we first started writing the song, we intentionally did it with one of our partners, Chris from the World Evangelical Alliance. He had specifically given us this language of mobilization songs and said, we really want to make sure we have, with this project, songs that give music to this movement. And so we were talking about hopeful phrases and looking to the scriptures for how do we think about marching orders? What does that look like? And so one of the first things we talked about was the kingdom of God coming. And so we started messing around with different melodies, and we came up with this melody that was actually even more of a gospel song. When we first came up with it, it was like, the kingdom is coming. Just kind of clapping. The kingdom is coming. And then we would kind of, in between, we would riff on a question. And we'd say, the kingdom is coming. We are waiting for it. The kingdom is coming. We are working for it. And we'd riff on it. And eventually we got to a point where we said, so wait, which one is it? Is it the kingdom is coming, we're working for it? Is it the kingdom is coming, we're waiting for it? Oh, no, it should be we're praying for it. And we went around in circles about what it should be. And it eventually led us to this great point of recognizing, no, I think that what's at the heart of this album is that it's all of those things. That if we believe that God is renewing all things, that there is an aspect in which there is a lament that we bring to it, where we say the kingdom is coming and we are praying for it. We are crying out to God about it. There's an aspect of trust where we say we can wait on the Lord. That theme of waiting on the Lord has happened multiple times on the album. So we say the kingdom is coming, we're praying for it. We say the kingdom is coming, we're waiting for it. But that also God actually gives us work to do. And that's why the third line we say is the kingdom is coming, we are working for it.
praying for it. The kingdom is coming. We are waiting for it. Kingdom is coming. We are working for it. The kingdom is coming. All creation grows, grows.
The fire in the sky, we watch it burn. The waters that keep rising up, the floods that come. Put your hope in the Lord. Put your hope in the Lord. He will lead us all the way. The kingdom is coming. We are praying for it. The kingdom is coming. We are waiting for it. Kingdom is coming. We are working for it. The kingdom is coming.
Yeah, all creation grows.
Boy, one of the things I loved when we were recording the song, we had most of it written, but as we were going into the studio, there was still, the second verse was still a little wobbly. And somebody brought up this notion of saying, instead of just calling out to the people, we should call out to leaders. And so we ended up putting this lyric in, all you nations, all you judges, all you kings, which I just loved because I thought, oh, it's such biblical language, right? There's a sense in which Isaiah and the major prophets, they're constantly calling out to the judges, which kind of meant something a little different, maybe in the Old Testament does now, but they would call out the judges. They would call out the nations. They would call out the kings of the earth. And we thought, oh, that's a great judges, nations, and kings still has some teeth and meaning today. And so the invitation at the end of the song is all you nations, all you judges, all you kings, come and join the work as he restores all things.
Well, obviously people are, I think, going to go listen as soon as they can to this music, and we'll provide links for that. But Peter, I want to ask you, what are some of the ways that people can get involved with Climate Vigil?
I would love to answer that question. We are moving into a season of inviting people to gather in their local communities to bear witness to our climate crisis and take action to end it. It's a really exciting moment because we are, as Isaac said, being sent out from this worship experience into the world to do the work that we're called to do. For so many of us who are concerned or maybe just curious about climate change, there is no place to go. We find ourselves listening to podcasts, reading articles, following the inexorable degradation of our living planet, and beginning to feel anxious and helpless about that because we feel alone in that. And there's a sense in which people aren't talking about it, people aren't responding to it. Am I deceived? Am I really understanding the depth of this crisis if nobody else understands it? So we want to provide a place for people to go with those feelings and recognize that none of us can do this alone. We do need to do it together. We do need to bear witness. That's an important part of the work, is to acknowledge that bad things are happening, and also to hold that space to say, but wait, we are here and we have agency and the kingdom is coming. There's something powerful about bringing people together with a common purpose. And music brings us together. So we would love for these songs to be played in churches, for climate vigils that are congregation-based, and for vigils that are public, that are not church-based. We're looking at inviting people to gather with music that is not necessarily worship music or Christian music, but recognizing that all music has a motivating spiritual element to it. So we'll be inviting musicians who are in community to volunteer. And for example, here in Baker City, Oregon, where I live, rural community of 10,000 in very conservative Eastern Oregon, we have a piano player and composer who will be rolling an upright piano out onto the sidewalk in front of our Crossroads Carnegie Art Museum. And we'll be holding space there with beautiful music. We'll have chalk available for kids and adults to interpret our climate crisis with chalk art, with sidewalk art. So it's this creative space. It's a place to go. And from there, we'll be looking for opportunities to take practical action together. And there's power in that too. There's power in being in community and taking action. I believe action leads to hope, not the other way around. And there's also something infectious about that. When other people see us taking collective action, there's a recognition that this matters. And there's a respect for the courage that it takes to speak truth and take action on it. So that's the season that we're stepping into now. I'm really excited about the way that the Porter's Gate has given us this beautiful, shining invitation to the world to say, host a vigil in your community, join a vigil in your community, be part of the movement. You have a part to play.
And it really sounds like when you say be part of a vigil, you're also inviting people to define what that means, depending on their community, on their resources, on their connections. It seems like it could be a lot of things. Is that a good read?
Yes. So the key ingredients would be a gathering place, a safe space for people to show up, and music, and some other form of creative medium. For us, it's going to be colored chalk that we can take to the sidewalk. So those are some elements that we'll have. But we don't want to stop there. We want to offer learning opportunities. We want to offer opportunities for people to sign up for acts of service and eventually advocacy, because the work of justice is not charity. It is showing up, it is speaking up, and it is taking action to effect change. So we'll be inviting climate vigil communities to participate in all of the above.
There's something a little paradoxical, I find, in the thought that it would be Christ followers in a community welcoming and leading others into response, into climate action, just because much of the world sees the Evangelical Church in a particular light. They would be the last people to be promoting climate vigil. So there's something really paradoxical and powerful, I think, in this idea that this isn't just a Christian project, right? And that there are real ways that the church can lead if it has the courage to do so. Would you agree, Isaac?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of the Christians I know get a little discouraged sometimes in a way that I think there's room for hope, where people get discouraged about, oh, isn't it terrible that because of all of these mistakes or wrongs that have been done, that the church has such a bad reputation in North America, or that Christians have such a bad reputation. And I think there's a lot to lament there, as we talked about earlier. But I also think that the reality is our neighbors are human beings who desire love and want purpose for their life, just like we all do. And that I think when our neighbors see us, see the church, and see Christians as individuals caring about justice, caring about this sort of shared world that we inhabit, wanting to speak with beauty and artistry about the goodness of the world that we live in, I think that we can be surprised sometimes how quickly we find that we have things in common and how quickly people are ready to partner with us when we have something that we can be excited about and that we're not just acting as a shrill remonstrance against the world or against our culture or against our neighbors.
We've been in conversation with Peter Fargo of the Climate Vigil movement and Isaac Wardell of the Porter's Gate about their collaborative project called Climate Vigil Songs. If you or your community would like to engage with this music or with the Climate Vigil project in general, you'll find helpful links on the podcast website, including links to an album discussion guide and all the song lyrics. If you appreciate this podcast and want to help us expand its global reach, please show your support by subscribing. Just go to whatever platform you listen to podcasts on and hit the subscribe or follow button for the Earthkeepers podcast. I'm Forrest Dinsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Our producer is Dave Wolfers. Timothy Connor is our editor, and Forrest Reed is the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman, and Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.